أشهد أن عليا حجة الله.
السلام عليكم شيخنا.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
أحوالكم؟
Alhamdulillah.
How's things? What have you been up to?
Alhamdulillah, can't complain. Just been in form of ghaiba. Alhamdulillah,
Yeah.
just basically been trying to, had a few things to finish off, my academic work. And in addition to that, just my job and also just studies. So primarily that.
Alhamdulillah.
What about yourself?
Yeah, same thing. It's like family,
Yeah?
work,
Yeah, of
trying
course.
to study as much as you can when you can. Trying to
Alhamdulillah.
run this project, this channel, as you know.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, yes,
and
that's right. That's right.
you know
Yeah.
what is it? All of this, the most difficult thing about this whole thing is trying to fit it all together, trying to balance out life, trying to be a father, trying to be a husband, trying to be a son, trying to be a servant to the Imam, trying to be a student of knowledge, trying to put out as many videos as possible,
Of
trying
course.
to, and it's, the balance I think is the most difficult. But alhamdulillah, but this is the hayat, this is life, this is how
That
it is.
is always quite difficult, to be fair. Yes, absolutely.
Sheikhna, I hope you don't mind. I want to. I've been recording this.
Yeah, I know. It says at the top of the
Inshallah.
call, Hassan is recording the call. Yes.
Yeah, nah. So forgive me. Just, I just think
No,
it's
don't worry about it.
important
Don't worry about it.
for the brothers and sisters, inshallah, to learn from you, and maybe I have a few questions as well. Maybe you can help us with.
Astaghfirullah, husn dhannakum, hada, husn dhannakum.
So, I just, first of all, Muharram is coming up, as of course you know.
Of course.
So I just wanted to ask you, how do you think Muharram has been progressing, especially in the West, in the last, let's say, 10 years? And do you think it's been going in the right direction?
Okay, well, I think that's a great question. Obviously, it's difficult for me to speak about the West
Yeah.
entirely.
I mean, from what you've seen on YouTube.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so,
No matter what I say, and no matter how great my experience would be in the West,
yeah,
whatever I would say would be based upon what we call istiqra naqas, right? A limited sample of what I've seen, and what I've seen would always be a limited sample in the first place. For there's always going to be majalis we don't know of, but in general, what I can say is let's start off with the positives. It's always necessary to start off with the positives, and that
okay.
way we can make our way forward, inshallah ta'ala. I think most definitely one thing we've seen over the past 10 years is, alhamdulillah, previously English majalis were once seen as something you do for the kids. And I guess that was just symbolic of the fact that the community at the time viewed itself as, when you first migrate to a country, you're not sure, am I part of that country? Do I want my kids to be part of the fabric of this country? And so there might have been a tendency for Iraqis to have their majalis in Arabic, Bahrainis likewise, Kuwaitis likewise, the Lebanese would have their own majalis, the Pakistanis would have their own majalis, and the Khawajas would have their own majalis. When I first experienced the Shi'a community, the Khawaja community was still even doing many of their majalis in the Urdu language. And English was very much viewed as the language that we're going to do for the really young children. In fact, I've spoken in communities where they invite you as an English speaker, and that pretty much is the attitude, that English was the language for the young children.
Yeah.
And I think, alhamdulillah, that attitude is primarily gone now. Generally now, you'll find that the communities are pretty well integrated when it comes to the Muharram majalis. You'll find people of all nationalities, all ethnicities attending the English majalis. And so they're far less ethnically segregated, and definitely the content has, mashallah, in many cases improved.
Yeah, I'd definitely agree with you. I think like recently there is a Instagram page. I think it's called Majalis UK or something like that. Uh,
Mashallah.
so basically, the person behind the page, they show all the different majalis in the UK, and
That's
it's
great.
super. It's amazing. Like I'm seeing a lot of Arabic lecture. No, there'll be like, for example, English lecture, then Arabic lecture, or English lecture, then Urdu lecture. And you know what? Like even like for example, mashallah, Al Akbar, they're doing an amazing job. They, for example, they're bringing in Hajj Basim al Karbala'i and things like that. And the main lecture, is in English. So I think it's the development of Muharram has been amazing, especially in the West. And I
So
do
I,
feel,
I don't want to do tashkhis or speak about specific examples. MashaAllah, the group you mentioned have done amazing work, and you know, definitely knowing one of the brothers who's heavily active in it, I can say his heart is definitely in the right place. He has a real love for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and he wants to see development and improvement in his community, which, in many cases he's transformed the organization from one which was pretty inactive to being one of the biggest youth organizations in London now.
yeah,
And may Allah grant them the best of success in that,
inshallah.
as long as they're dedicated to the message of the Ahlul Bayt. However, in general, one thing I've found is when the majalis are in English and the radud is in Arabic, it's tough to balance. MashaAllah, it can sometimes work, and I believe the brothers have done all they can to make it work. But definitely, when you bring a big name, what would happen when you have the English speech immediately before the Radud comes out is that sometimes you would find those who don't understand English and have only shown up for the Radud no longer respect the English majlis.
Yeah, agreed. Sahih.
Now,
So
of course, I said I'm not doing tashkhis. I'm not saying this is what happens at Akbar, nor am I saying that this is something that specifically happens in London. But it is something I've seen in other parts of the world, and it is something that, if can be avoided,
Sahih.
would be better, because when our youth, you see, the problem is we what we're saying here, Brother Hassan, we're not saying it in order to malign anyone. We're saying, of course, we have husn al-dhan when it comes to how we deal with the believers. And perhaps it might be that the elders, just because they don't understand English, it's quite natural that they would start talking during the majlis, because they're thinking to themselves, well, we don't understand what's going on, right?
Yeah, yeah,
However, the problem is when the youth start seeing that the elders are speaking and the youth are learning from those elders, sometimes they might learn to indirectly disrespect the majlis of Abu Abdullah alayhi salatu wassalam as a result of seeing elders do it, even if that action is done out of ignorance, if that makes any sense.
yeah, Sahih. I totally
Yeah.
agree. But don't you think in I feel like if a lecturer makes a good majlis, does a good majlis in the UK, he's kind of made it in the West. I feel like London is like the central point of majalis when it comes to like Muharram.
So, again, from my limited induction, what I've experienced is that you're right. Normally, when you travel around the world, they think that we as a London community are an extremely spoilt community.
Yeah,
And as you know, the grass is always greener on the other side. I believe they are correct. I believe that as a general Shia hub of activity, you will not find a place that has as many thriving English majalis as you would find in London. However, at the same time, I do believe that we in London often take that for granted, and we have a very kind of isolated, narrow view of the world. There are people who live in Canada, for example, or they live in America, or even as far as New Zealand, who have spoken to me and they've said to me, oh, I wish I lived in London like you previously have. And I would tell them that, well, London's community, mashallah, yes, there is a lot of activity going on there, but it's not this ideal paradise that you think it is. In fact, I think many Londoners don't truly appreciate the value of having all these organizations.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
sometimes what we would hope to see between the organizations is التعاون على البر والتقوى, a cooperation upon righteousness. And sometimes, the shabab, because youth organizations are always built up of networks of friends, they might not always have that relationship where they unite with one another in order to produce good programs. I know that there's definitely good examples of where they have. And again, every listener needs to understand that we're not doing tashkhis here. We're not specifying that anyone specifically does this. Rather, we're talking generally.
Alhamdulillah, if I'm honest with you, Sheikhna,
Yes.
me being in London and so on, I could definitely say Alhamdulillah, like people are starting to mix with all different organizations. It's starting to happen. Alhamdulillah, it's actually a very good step. If I'm totally honest, yani. It is a
Alhamdulillah, I imagine it is a good step, and I imagine that it's certainly happening to a certain degree. However, from my experience, generally the organizations are comprised of people who come largely from a similar ethnic background, and definitely even within that ethnic background from specific cities too. And that's very natural, by the way.
yeah.
I think the Shia community, when I first migrated to London, was a bit more united because back in those days, things weren't organized, so they couldn't afford to be as picky as they can be today.
Yeah.
And I wish I would see that unity once more.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
So, what do you define a successful majlis? And for a majlis to become successful, how do they do it?
Inshallah ta'ala. I believe a successful majlis is not defined by someone like me. For who am I to define a successful majlis? Rather, the only true person that knows if a majlis is successful is Allah Azza wa Jal, and indeed the Ahlul Bayt, of course, with the knowledge that Allah Azza wa Jal has given them of these majalis.
Okay.
However, we can talk about it from our limited vantage point. So let's talk about what success is to us with a small s, not with a capital S.
Yeah. I like that one. For the small S, not a capital S. Yeah.
Success here could be judged by the following things. Number one, is the speaker particularly engaging? So naturally, when you're trying to bring the youth in, you would need to bring a speaker who appeals to the general masses of the population that you're bringing in. Now, that doesn't mean that, our religion is democratic in the topics being put out. No. Our speakers are not there to butter up or to gloss over the facts or the truth. Rather, they are to present the truth as it is. However, they need to be able to articulate it in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
So, let me give you an analogy. It wouldn't be befitting for someone who is completely unfamiliar with the local lingo and the local dialect, so to speak, of people in Scotland to come over and speak in a dialect which is unfamiliar to them and with terminologies unfamiliar to them and with thoughts and concepts completely unfamiliar to them and be able to spread it. The Quran talks about how Allah Azza wa Jal has sent always the messengers in the language of the people that they are addressing. And when we say here the language, we don't mean necessarily just the vocabulary. We don't mean just the ability to speak the same language. No. We mean language as in understanding the culture, understanding how people think, understanding what the contemporary problems of that community are. And so sometimes I find that I get frustrated when I'm invited somewhere abroad and you try and ask that community, okay, could you please inform me as to how your community is? And they try and do mujamala and they don't tell you about what the real issues are because they think that, well, it's ebb for me to tell the sheikh that. And so as a result, you're not addressing the real issues. It's always important for a speaker and the majlis which is successful for the speaker to be on top of the contemporary issues which are facing everybody.
Sheikhna, sorry to interrupt you.
No problem.
I was reading, I don't know why I came across it the other day. I think it was last year that Sayed Al Sistani gave basically his advice for the khutbah. Just
Sayyid
before,
Ali Sistani gives his advice to the khutbah every single year normally.
yeah, he's got one this year as well, inshallah, that will be
Yes.
doing some commentary on soon, inshallah.
May Allah bless you, inshallah ta'ala, and grant you the best of success.
Inshallah. He basically says
Inshallah ta'ala, you'll be following it.
inshallah. I'm to be honest with you, I was going to go and lecture somewhere, but a few things came up. Some
Yes.
matters came up, so I wasn't able to. But inshallah, maybe in the after Ashura, maybe we'll do some majalis. And we're definitely gonna do the purified majalis. Inshallah.
Yeah, we'll have some words about that later on. Inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah. So yeah, he basically says, the Sayyid, he basically says it's important, one of the first points he makes, it's important that the speaker knows his audience, understands their problems, understands where they're shifting to the wrong area, and how to basically approach to talk to them about the specific subject that they are going wrong in. So, and I thought it was very important that the Sayyid says that, because many times I've seen khutbah talking about, I don't know, he's refuting like some professor that no one knows about on a subject that no one cares about, and then it's just, we don't really get anywhere, and it's just why would you do that? I mean, you got
So,
Shabbat.
if you could allow me to address that to a certain degree,
Fadl.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, brother Hassan. Perhaps you have something important to say.
No,
Please
no, no,
forgive me for that.
that was it basically. Fadl.
Okay. Well, I'm very glad you brought this up, and this definitely contextualizes our discussion a lot more.
Yeah.
In regards to understanding your audience, I'd like to come back to this point in a more general and specific context later on in the conversation. However, in the context of Sayyid Ali Sistani's words, may Allah preserve him and all of the righteous ulama, inshallah ta'ala,
Inshallah.
we find that what he has stated is indeed very wise. And I think he understands that, unfortunately, many communities have a tendency to bring speakers in, hoping that they'll fix up the situation, hoping that they'll fix up the dynamic of, say, certain youth issues. But sometimes that's extremely difficult, because the previous model we've been employing is that someone comes in for 10 days. Maybe on one of the nights, someone will take him to the side and say, Sheikh, now can you please speak about this? But he hasn't found his way into the hearts of the Shabab, and so it's difficult for them to take what he's saying seriously. Or indeed, sometimes they have a level of qaddasa, where the Shabab are even afraid to speak to them because they respect them and revere them so much that it's difficult for them to even bring up these issues in a specific manner. So Sayyid Sistani's advice is extremely helpful. Only a person which is vaguely familiar with the community he's going to can assist. Now, the difficulty is, now that you've mentioned that London is one of the flagships of Shia Majalis, one of the places where people really launch and get successful, and you're a big name if you're making it in the Shia Majalis world, relatively speaking. I don't like to use these terminologies of celebs and what have you, because that's not what this is all about. It's about serving Allah Azza wa Jal, serving the Ahlul Bayt. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon them all. In regards to what you mentioned, you're going into a community with Shabab there and you're refuting Professor X. Sometimes, Brother Hassan, sometimes this is justifiable. What do I mean by that? You would admit that there are certain speakers, again, we don't want to do any tashkhis, we don't want to mention names, inshallah ta'ala.
No, of course not.
These speakers are so big, as in their influence is so wide-reaching, that their audience is not primarily the 500 people sitting in front of them, or the 1,000 people sitting in front of them. Rather, their audience will spread far beyond that online. In such a case, when there are intellectuals in the community demanding responses to certain things, it's necessary for that speaker to respond to those professors, especially if that professor has a name within the popular domain, he has a media platform and what have you. If it were not for the fact that our speakers have responded to the shubahat of people like Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, we would find that the community would be in a state of confusion. And so sometimes it's necessary for that to be done. Even if you're looking at your friends living in Crooklewood in Willesden in London, and you're thinking these guys don't have a clue about who Richard Dawkins is, and even if they've heard of him, they don't really care about what he's saying.
Yeah.
However, you've got a couple university students who are studying in different cities of the world who do care about what he's saying, and they really need a response. So in those cases, it's necessary.
Sorry, Sheikh, but
No problem.
I get so many questions from students in uni that are like regarding ethics, morality, existence of God,
Yes.
and so forth. And you're so right. You are very right about that. And it's not usually the ones that attend majalis a lot are the ones that are asking these questions. Usually the ones that are gone to university and they're meeting non-Muslims, they're meeting atheists, they're meeting, so forth, these type of people that will give you that will question your religion from an angle that, a Muslim wouldn't, for example.
And to be honest with you, the honest truth is, when you read the bayan of Sayed Al Sistani, may Allah preserve him and the righteous ulama, inshallah ta'ala, the one that was released for this year and also in previous years, a common theme has been that one of the things he wished for the speakers to focus and emphasize upon was the ability to strengthen and build the aqidah of the youth.
Yeah.
So the ability to defend Allah Azza wa Jal from the shubahat of those who would have everyone question his existence.
Yep.
And to be honest with you, brother, this advice is a general global advice that the Sayyid gives.
Yeah.
He gives it to people in Iraq, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, and in other countries. But I think, to be honest with you, this advice pertains to us more in the West.
Yeah.
Because we who grow up with the confusing, morally deprived, and decaying nature of society that we have, this liberalism around us, and this tendency to constantly switch morality as if, you're switching the color of your hair, or as if you're switching into a new jumper.
Yeah.
It's necessary for our youth who pick up these things without even realizing to have answers and to understand the situation they're in. How many times don't you find that just because of your upbringing here in the West, there's times where you didn't understand a certain aspect of Islam or you might have been against it, but you realize that, wow, I didn't have a real rational reason to be against it. It's just everyone in society says that, so I believed it to be true.
100%. I had a lot like that when I was growing up here.
And I think most of our shabab do. It's very normal.
I was having a conversation with one of the shabab the other day, and he was saying, he was asking, did Imam Ali, for example, degrade woman? What about this hadith that says this? I said to him, look, I just gave him a simple answer. I said, look, is it verified for you that Allah and His Messenger and the Imams alayhum salam are always upon wisdom? Yes. I was like, do you have any doubt that Allah, for example, degrades woman or degrades, a certain group of humans? He said, no. I said to him, there you go. I said, khalas, that foundation is established by the Quran and the Sunnah. So I said to him,
right, so you're using that principle of muhkamat al-wahi.
Yeah.
And rudd al-mutashabahat al-muhkamat.
Yeah,
that we take the clear-cut and established from revelation, be it hadith or Quran, and we return that which is slightly open to interpretation against the muhkamat. That's very good. That's very good.
And because it's important, I said to him, if you want to establish something. For example, the hadith where Imam Ali alayhi salam supposedly degrades women. I said there has to be a ta'wil for it. Why? Because the Quran and the established Sunnah doesn't say that. So I said to him, if you have this qa'idah, sometimes you won't need a sheikh to answer you. You won't need a student of knowledge to answer you. You won't need someone that reads here and there to answer you. You will be
Yes.
able to kind of understand that no, there's an interpretation to it. The Quran and the established Sunnah doesn't accept this, and the Quran
Yes.
doesn't say this. So these things are important. But Sheikh, I wanted to go to a very critical point of Sayed Al Sistani's advice to the khutaba.
تفضل.
And I think it's maybe in your expertise as well, is where he talks about it's important to mention that which is authentic and reliable on the minbar.
Yes.
I think so. There's certain areas where on the minbar, it's not the khatib's fault, and in another area it is his fault. I'll tell you. Let me explain myself. Inshallah.
Please go ahead. Yes.
So you have the lecturer that is mentioning some poetry, form of poetry, and like say the Zainab said this to Hussein. It's a form of poetry. Like
Yes.
everyone should be able to understand that this is poetry. Now maybe he needs to say this is poetry, but I just feel like our culture with Muharram has been established so much that he doesn't need to tell the audience that this is poetry. Because some people take in, like I've heard some Shabab, they come ask, oh, did Sayyid Zainab say this? I'm like, no, this is poetry. Or did Imam Hussein say this? I'm like, no, this is poetry. And the
Oh,
second,
yeah. I once had a conversation with one of the Shabab who made an argument that that already in the time of the classical Arabs, or what we could call the era of the formative period of Islam, the first 200 years of Islam, he argued that cha must have already been used as a substitute for kaf. In the same way we say occasionally in the Iraqi dialect, Siddiq Chivib, for example, or what have you.
Yeah.
So I asked him, like, brother, what made you reach this conclusion? So he said to me, because Zainab said this.
Yeah.
And I got a little frustrated because I didn't think I'd have to explain to somebody that what is stated by the khatib, what is stated by the scholar on the minbar, when he might say, for example, Galit Zainab. What he's saying is, this is what I can imagine Zainab saying in Lisan al-Hal.
Yeah.
This is what a poet has imagined Zainab to be saying in a language of poetry.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, you're absolutely right. Without contextualization, the further our youth get away from religion and a culture of religion, they'll understand these things less and less.
I think as well, I want to go to the other point of
Yes.
basically the khutaba narrating only that which is authentic and reliable. I think this is a very crucial point. A very, very crucial point. I think you would know better than me. In the Arab world, I think it seems like they refer to the later sources for the event of Karbala. Now, I don't know their intention, but I feel like our great ulama have spoken about this enough for these khutabat to know that it's unacceptable for you to be using these sources that came, I don't know, 500, 600, 700 years after the actual event. And then the author that's gathering these sources doesn't even tell us where he got these reports from. And it just seems like sometimes they want the more exaggerated reports to make the story more mythical and more kind of like like the Greek gods and so on. And I'll be honest with you, it upsets me because Hussein didn't need Karbala to be great. Karbala needed Hussein to be great, and it's us human beings, it's us, especially the Shia and Muslims. We needed Karbala.
Right.
happen, Ashura to happen, to basically show how great Hussein is. Because without Ashura, we wouldn't have known, because of our ignorance, not because of Imam al-Hussein. So I just feel it's important that this is spoken about, especially on the pulpit. And I'm glad that Sayyid Sistani has spoken about it. So I kind of
Sayed
just want
Sistani actually mentions this. May Allah bless him and prolong his life and the lives of all of the righteous ulama, inshallah ta'ala. Sayyid Al Sistani actually mentions this every single year.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that some people don't take his advice. Although those who don't take his advice honestly have tended to be of those who are probably not his muqallideen, in all fairness. I tend to find that there are speakers who not play, but rather pay a lot more diligence in taking the heed of Sayyid Al Sistani's advice than others. There are certain scholars who try their best to abide strictly with following a very manhaji approach, a very methodological, strict approach in giving us the facts. Generally, we know who those speakers are. Then you have the others who are not necessarily scholars, rather they are people who are just narrating that which is commonly said from the minbar. And the problem with our lay people today is they often don't distinguish. And that's because they view them as they're both wearing the same uniform, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's...
How does I think it will be important for, because I'm asking this question, Sheikhna, because a lot of shabab are starting to lecture and so on, which is, I think, is a good thing.
Yes.
So how does someone like the shabab know what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable? What is reliable, what isn't reliable? What is authentic, what isn't authentic? I think if you give us...
generally, there are dhawabit. And one of we're not expecting people to become muhaqqaqeen in tarikh overnight. This is one of the fallacies that some people commit. We're not expecting you, brother, to become someone that's a muhaqqaq in history, someone that's an academic researcher. You don't have to recreate the wheel. There are certain books that have been written which are generally dependable. You can depend upon the work of someone that is a scholar in history, and some of those books are available in English. When in doubt, stick to that which is mashhur. This is a very common principle.
Especially with Tariq.
Absolutely, and this is something that a lot of people get confused about. Some people seem to think that in history, we utilize exactly the same standard as we would use in, for example, measuring fiqh or jurisprudential reports. That is not the case. That is not the case neither for us, nor for the scholars of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the Ahl al-Hadith. And so one needs to not conflate these facts.
Especially, Sheikh, sorry to interrupt you. Especially now, online, you can just, there's them websites, you just put in, the name of a narrator, and then, you'll get all of the aqwal of A'immat al-Hadith and so on, and they'll tell you, then you can just, so everyone kind of thinks they're scholars of Rijal these days, and so they live in this world of, no, it needs to be Sahih, but they just don't understand that.
May Allah bless them for their good intentions. They probably felt that they were trying to do a good thing. And there's certain people I know who study Rijal, and their heads are far more screwed on than the simplistic ones. But at the end of the day, every person is trying to do good. It's just we have that classical saying that the path to hell is paved with good intentions, right? It's a classical English saying. I'm not saying that people are going to go to Jahannam due to their good intentions, but what I'm saying is sometimes having good intentions without wisdom, hikmah, and knowledge can lead to destruction.
It
And what I mean by that is when you notice that the very people of hadith themselves were not people that applied this specific methodology.
Right.
Like, so for example, I can quote Sayed Al on this. If someone wants to see that Sayed Al, who by the way is known for reviving Ilm al-Rijal popularly. When I say popularly, I mean to say that you had people before him like At-Tustari, who may have even been more diligent than Sayyid Al-Khou'i himself in Ilm al-Rijal, according to the Mutakhassisin. However, At-Tustari was not the popularizer of Ilm al-Rijal in the previous century. Rather, Sayyid Al-Khou'i was. People like Sayyid Al-Khou'i have made it very clear when you do an istiqra, if you do a brief investigation into his mu'jam, but there are cases where Ilm al-Rijal is not the methodology to be used in history. You would be shocked by this. If you were to name some of the most skeptical hadithi, Ahl al-Hadith type figures in history, who would you think of?
Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani and Zahabi. They also say the same thing.
No. Let's go a generation after them. Those are strict. But those are scholars of hadith that are agreed upon by all Sunnis. If you're thinking kind of like Athari, Salafi based, which scholars can you think of?
Ibn Taymiyyah.
Hassan. Did you know that Ibn Taymiyyah states in his Minhaj al-Sunnah the following? These battles, which are from the category of such reports, are not known to have been mentioned by the people of knowledge in the well-known books of Maghazi and Sir. Books of Sirah, basically. Sir is the Jama of Sirah. The giants of this subject have not mentioned them either, such as Musa bin Uqba, Urwa ibn Zubair, Al-Zuhri, Ibn Ishaq, and his teachers Al-Waqidi, Yahya ibn Sa'id, Al-Umawi, Al-Walid bin Muslim, Muhammad bin A'if, and others. They have not been mentioned in the hadith, and nothing was revealed in the Quran regarding them. In conclusion, the battles of the Messenger of Allah, especially the battles in which physical combat took place, are well known, famous, recorded, and mutawatir according to the people of knowledge aware of its details. They are mentioned in the books of the scholars of hadith, the fuqaha, the mufassirun, the books of Maghazi, Sir, and their like. This is what motivates one of them to narrate. Now, did you notice there who he mentioned as scholars and giants of the subject? Musa bin Uqba, Urwa bin Zubair, Az-Zuhri, Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq is not normally considered to be a strict hadithi. Al-Waqidi. What do they say about Al-Waqidi?
Yeah.
These are not narrators who are known to be thuqat in hadith sciences, but you find in history, they're taking from them. So the principle here, for those who don't know any of these names, don't worry, you don't need to know any of these names. You don't even need to consider yourself with Ibn Taymiyyah here. Rather, the principle is merely being struck that there is a science for hadith when it comes to measuring fiqhi narrations, and there's a science for history. They're very separate.
You know, Sheikhna, just a quick question. I don't want to get into it too much because I know we'll be talking for hours and hours. But why is it that some of the muhaddithin of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, like Ibn Hajar, for example?
La, Habibi, I don't want to get too much into what the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah have to say, because this is a talk about Muharam. But go ahead with your question, and inshallah ta'ala I'll decide if it's worth answering, inshallah.
Yeah, so he basically says that Lut bin Yahya is, they don't accept history from him, and they don't, accept anything from him. While they accept from someone like Sayyid bin Umar al-Tamim, after, it's mentioned he's a Zindiq and so on.
Yes.
Why the double standard?
Allahu alim. You can ask one of their ulama, inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah. Okay, let's move on.
Yes.
I like that one. Swiftly but surely. So what should the Shia community, and we're talking more focused on the youth, inshallah,
Yes.
should they be doing before Muharram and after Muharram? And when we say Muharram, we're talking more or less
Yes.
after Thalith al-Imam, yani after 13th of Muharram, after, you know, the istishhad has occurred and so on.
Okay, that's a great question. So first of all, I believe that what our shabab should be doing is trying to gain lessons from this period of Muharram, from the days in which Imam al-Hussein's tragedy and the masa'ib of those who surrounded him is mentioned. They can learn a lesson from everything.
Okay.
The important thing is that we don't turn this into folklore. And what I mean by that is mythology, which makes people feel good, which makes them boost themselves in merely their identity, where they go, I'm a Shia of Ahlul Bayt, and they don't implement anything of what the Ahlul Bayt are saying in their daily lives. You see, one thing we've done is we have turned the majalis of Imam Hussein, and I'm not talking about what the ulama have done. The ulama have tried to fight this. I'm talking about it's a danger that human beings have. Muslims in general, they do this with a month of Shahri Ramadan. But we Shia were guilty sometimes of doing it with Muharram. And I think many times they do it without even realizing it, Brother Hassan. They would take the stories of Imam Hussein, the stories, the narratives which are said about what happened at Karbala, and all they would take away from it is the fact they need to cry. Now, of course, crying is important. Crying is very important because we are a people who have lost our humanity. How many of us in this digital age can be watching TV whilst having our dinner with our family? News comes on of a child that's been murdered. News comes on of people being massacred abroad. And we just flick the channel and see if there's something interesting on, like football. We live in a world where tears have run dry. And we lack both sympathy and empathy for other human beings. So crying is extremely important. And as Rayyan ibn Shabib is told, Ya ibn Shabib, O son of Shabib, if you were to cry over something, then cry over my grandfather Hussein. Because Imam Hussein's tragedy is the greatest tragedy in human history. So the crying is important. However, crying based upon what? Crying based upon ma'rifah. Now, what do I mean by that? Brother Hassan, let me just throw out a hypothetical question to you, inshallah. Imagine you were to go on holiday to a country. Pick a country. Pick a non-Muslim country and tell me about this.
Maldives.
Maldives. That's a very random one, brother.
It's a place
Okay, we'll roll with Maldives. No worries.
Yeah.
Imagine you went to the Maldives. And let's imagine in a hypothetical world that the Maldives had its own unique mythology based upon history.
Yeah.
And what I mean by mythology is a distortion of how to understand history, a distortion of the truth. So, what do I mean by that? I mean, imagine you would meet locals in Maldives and they would tell you, we're crying today for Bob. And you would say, why are you crying for Bob? And they'd say to you, because Bob was massacred in this way. And you would say to them, okay, tell me a little bit about Bob. What's he got to him? You know, what's Bob all about? And they would tell you, I don't really know, but he's the brother of Bill. And you would say, okay, who's Bill? And they would say, well, he was poisoned in this way. And you would say, okay, tell me a little bit about him, Habibi. And they would say to you, well, we don't really know anything about Bill either. But he was the son of our first president, and his name is Alistair. And you would say, okay, tell me a little bit about Alistair, and all they can tell you is where he's born and how he died. Would you say that those tears would be genuine at that point?
Not really, no. I mean,
So
genuine in the sense
they may have felt something in their heart. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah,
we
that's-
can't deny that from them.
Yeah.
But would you say that it makes sense that with all that grief they feel for Bob and Bill and Alistair, that they know nothing about their personalities?
Yeah, you haven't given them the real affection that you should have. And
Sense. And that's what we're trying to say. We're trying to say here that how can you claim to love someone that you've never made an attempt to get to know?
Agreed.
So what our youth need to do prior to Muharram, during Muharram, after Muharram, is gain knowledge. You know, our Imams were very emphatic about gaining knowledge. Very, very emphatic indeed. I'm just going to read a couple of narrations about the need to gain knowledge.
Inshallah, تفضل Sheikh.
One of the narrations is from Imam al-Baqir, alayhi salatu wassalam, who said, if I was brought one of the youth of the Shia who does not have an understanding of his religion, I would have disciplined him. لو أتيت بشاب من شباب الشيعة لا يتفقه لأدبته.
Ajib.
Yes. Now, in another version of that narration, we're told, لو أتيت بشاب من شباب الشيعة لا يتفقه في الدين لأوجعته. I would have caused him pain.
Well, I always tell the Shabab, knowledge. I can't emphasize on it enough.
You should set up an institute for knowledge, brother.
What do you mean?
Like a college or something.
You know, these are certain things that I do have a plan on doing. Like I also have a plan to do a project.
Gradually, I was teasing you. College is a bit too advanced, but
No, but you know, like certain
discussion circle and
yeah,
what have you.
like that. But I am
Halaqat.
looking to do courses, not for me to teach because I'm not on that level, but
Inshallah ta'ala, you learn and you teach them. It's an obligation for us all, you know. Inshallah ta'ala. But you, mashallah, are someone that's working hard on yourself, and we've seen many changes in you, mashallah. You know, a lot of people, they contact me and they say, mashallah, brother Hassan Qadri, he's changed so much in the past few years. And so
about developing, you know, I was you were speaking, so I didn't want to interrupt you, but it was funny. You know, he's talking about Ilm al-Rajal, and then someone, you know, going online, and is he, you know, trustworthy? Is he not? Even to be fair with you, even when I was younger, like, just because I read Black Najashi, I thought I was somehow a specialist all of a sudden. And then when you grow up, you kind of understand, like, all you did was just read a book. Like, it doesn't make you a specialist, you know.
yeah, no, I absolutely understand it. And to be honest with you, so most people that ever ask me about Ilm al-Rajal these days are people who are involved in the realm of polemics, right?
Yeah.
And it's pretty hilarious because they'll speak to you about Ilm al-Rajal, but then they only want to know about it for polemics. And then the very people they're speaking to aren't scholars even in Ahl Sunnah al-Rajal. They're just polemicists as well.
Yes.
And sometimes they're having stricter standards than people like Muhakkak al-Albani. And you're thinking to yourself, wow, like, who am I going to take here? But on that subject of Ilm al-Rajal, it's very important to point out, again, that our usage of Ilm al-Rajal is primarily restricted to fiqh and aqidah. When it comes to narrations pertaining to tariq, different standards. When it comes to narrations pertaining to ma'arif or mawa'idh, we would find different standard as well, where we tell people that it's good to do X behavior. Different standard.
Sahih. Yeah, Sahih. It takes me, because Sheikh, I've taken a lot of your time. I do apologize. Forgive me.
No problem.
Just
Just very quickly. One of the brothers who is, mashallah, very sharp, works very hard for this religion, he informed me of an article a few months ago, which was published in an academic journal. The article is entitled Fighting for Justice, Engaging the Other, Shia Muslim Activism on the British University Campus, right?
Yeah.
So this is an article published in an academic journal about religions.
Yeah.
And this is a non-Muslim lady who spent some time in the Shia community. So listen to the title once more. Fighting for Justice, Engaging the Other, Shia Muslim Activism on the British University Campus. So she's discussing what? The activities of Shia Muslims on university campuses. Okay?
Yeah.
When you reach the section at the beginning pertaining to the results of this study, by the way, she spent, months engaging with the Shia community on British university campuses. Listen to what she concludes. She states, and I quote, "One of our key research findings is that despite the religious foundations of Shia student organizations in Britain, much of the publicly geared activism currently being undertaken by Shia students does not have an explicitly religious component." I'm going to break this down in a few seconds.
Yeah.
But rather is reflective of contemporary discourses of secularism and liberal humanitarianism. End quote.
Wow.
And she goes on to state after that, this is especially the case in examples of campaigns that explicitly target non-Muslims on campus. Now, what that needs to be understood as saying is that Shias, in their attempt to inform non-Muslims about Imam Hussein, we have numerous campaigns. These campaigns try to do their best. May Allah bless all of them. May Allah bless all of them for their intentions, inshallah ta'ala. And may He rectify their affairs and guide those of them who have carried this out in the wrong way despite doing it with great intentions. And may Allah increase them in their number, inshallah ta'ala, but under the guidance of the Ahlul Bayt. What we find is that Shias often, in trying to present Ashura, in trying to present what happened to Imam Hussein to the non-Muslim world, does exactly what this lady says. She described it as what? She said it is not something which has an explicitly religious dimension to it. Rather, it's specifically seen as a discourse of secularism and liberal humanitarianism. To put it in layman's terms, what she's essentially saying is it's often packaged as we're no different from you, we're just like you, we're charitable like you, Imam Hussein's just like you.
Allah, my days.
Allah musta'an. Allah musta'an.
I have a lecture that I'll be doing in Al Akbar. It's more or less around this topic.
Do you have an advertising deal with Al Akbar, like these days or something?
No. It's just because.
Oh, okay. Alhamdulillah.
Because I know some of the Shabab that work there, that's why, and I'm using.
Yes. No, that's fine. If you have an advertising thing from them, that's fine. They can advertise what was it? Purified what? Purified chill, and you can advertise Akbar, right?
Yeah.
I'm just teasing you, brother.
I know. So, just to go to, by the way, that was very interesting. Very interesting.
Yes.
Because it is something that I've seen a lot. From, they want to make Imam al-Hussein's stand like a good versus evil. Although it is.
Oh, wow. By the way, this paper is based on 3 years of field work. I just noticed in the footnote now. Yes.
Yeah. Like they make it a stand, like as in like, good versus evil, but they actually forget the reason Imam al-Hussein made that stand. And Imam al-Hussein, in his own words, says why he made that stand, which inshallah I will be discussing in the next few nights as well, inshallah.
Well, you can give us a quick sneak peek now if you want.
Yeah, so basically there is a letter from Imam al-Hussein that he sends to his brother Muhammad bin al-Hanafiyyah. So he says that his stand, basically him making the stance against Yazid bin Muawiyah is to what? Is to reform the religion of his grandfather Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And I think this is one of the most important.
Would you say it's reform or would you say it's revive? Now, the reason I'm very diligent on that difference is because today the word reform generally means someone that brings a completely new concept,
No, so we can say revive, but
Yes.
I meant it not in that terminology. I meant it more in the terms as in taking it back to its originality.
Yes.
So to basically to take it back to the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi and Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. He says this in his words. I don't want to give too
Alayhi
much
salatu
information
wassalam.
because I want to kind of surprise brothers and sisters, inshallah, with a commentary regarding this letter, inshallah.
Inshallah ta'ala. Inshallah. May Allah bless you and grant you the best of success in that project.
Last question, Sheikh. Now, I apologize. I've taken so much of your time.
No worries.
Your advice for our channel, inshallah. The channel.
Inshallah ta'ala. My advice for the channel would be that number one, well, do you mind me saying this advice on?
Yeah.
If you're recording it, okay.
I'm raw. I'm always raw. Whatever comes. Go for it.
I'm glad to hear that you're real with me, Habibi. We thought you were being fake. I'm just joking with you. Of course you're being real. Inshallah ta'ala. So, Brother Hassan, what I would say to you is, Alhamdulillah, as I mentioned, a lot of people have noticed a lot of changes in you, mashallah. And I see a lot of my former self in you in many ways, and I see you've undertaken journeys which I've similarly gone through. I think definitely one of the pitfalls that you might sometimes fall under, and I've definitely fallen into it in the past too, is there's a danger to view religion solely from the lens of a polemical world. Now, what I mean by that is, you're feeling that, you should have an answer to everything. These guys are coming up with shubahat, therefore you need to respond to it. That's how things work. And of course, it's always important for responses to be given. And sometimes we're wondering, why does nobody respond to them directly? And, that can lead to many different things. Sometimes people, they go down the wrong direction in order to address that problem. However, generally what I would say is polemics is not healthy, and that's why you find that normally our ulama in treatises of akhlaq, in treatises of ethics, they've pointed out that there's a tahrim of what we call jadal, disputation. And half the time polemics is disputation. It's not munazara. Munazara is something respectful done between two parties. Jadal is where, you're just constantly responding and there's absolutely zero respect shown in the arts. And what you find is, Hassan, these types of brothers that we're talking about, where you would have someone saying to you, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. You'd be discussing, for example, let's say your taste in clothing, and they would say to you, "Nah, but you're wrong, and you've just committed this fallacy." And you're like, "Habibi, what fallacy?" It's a subjective question. We're not in a debate.
Yeah, I agree. So in other words, Sheikh, you're saying don't do too much polemics.
Yes.
That was from the beginning. That was one of the main things. One of the main reasons I started this project, this channel, is because we have so many channels now. Everyone wants to refute everyone. Everyone somehow is a specialist in polemics. So I thought, we have nothing that actually educates, something that just puts out there. Now, don't get me wrong. From time to time, there needs to be a time for polemics, but I don't think.
Yeah, but can you generally have like this voice in the back of your mind telling you from time to time needs to remain from time to time?
Yeah.
Basically, I need you not to. You know that slogan that some people say, "Kullu yawmin Ashura wa kullu ardin Karbala,"
Yeah.
the one that they sometimes attribute to the Imam. Well, I need you to understand. Not every day is a day for polemics, and not every land is a land for polemics as well.
I agree. Sahih. Great
Inshallah.
advice, wallah. Sahih.
So that's the first of my advices. The second advice would always be to take your religion and your suluk from the righteous ulama. So I know that your relative, Sayyid Rida Sharafuddin
Yeah.
Abdul Hussein al-Musawi,
Yeah.
who you introduced me to when you came to visit me in Iraq,
Yeah.
is a very, very knowledgeable man, one of the students of Sheikh Wahid al-Khurasani. Definitely you need to remain under the shadow of such great men.
Yeah. We're always in contact, me and him. Always.
Alhamdulillah. And I say that as someone that is under the shadow of my teachers and has benefited from the wisdom of my own teachers, but it's very important to be under the shadow of such great ulama. In addition to that, I would say that you need to make this channel a light not only for yourself and for others in the Shia community, but you also need to make sure that this channel is being channeled and directed in such a way that people who are watching it from a non-Shia background would also be able to understand what is being said. It would not be in a language which is exclusive for Shias because of all the heavy use of terminologies. No. We live in a global age, and it's very important that we present our worldview. The time has ended in which all we talk about is certain aspects of Islam where we're specifically focusing on only one detached aspect of Aqidah. Now we live in the modern world, and in this disgusting decay and decadence that we as a diaspora community are witnessing in the Western world, where people are adopting Western values on a daily basis, where the hijab is being abandoned, where decent moral values are being abandoned. We need to ensure that we're presenting to them something which doesn't just make them feel better about themselves. Rather, it's something that pushes them, it motivates them to come back to the Ahlul Bayt, to return back to Allah Azza wa Jal. You see, you asked me, what would be a successful Muharram Majalis? I believe the true answer to that question is a Majlis, brother, which points people back in the direction of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And of course, Ali and Waliullah. That needs to be the message that we are presenting to the world. The pure Islam of Ali Muhammad. Pure Tawheed, in which Allah Azza wa Jal is recognized, and His governance and authority and His dominion reigns supreme. Not a Tawheed which restricts Allah Azza wa Jal. Not a Risala which reduces the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi to some figure who has only come for the Arab world. Rather, a global message brought to us through the sacrifices of the Ahlul Bayt and the sacrifices of their companions. Remember, brother, to always keep your allegiance to the Imam of this age, and to make sure that every single thing that you do is qurbatan ila Allah. For without the pleasure of Allah, there's no point to any of this work. We don't care how many likes you get. Brother, I once saw a tweet recently. It was a meme. And it said if the whole world united upon sin, it would still be a sin. The same is true. And the same is true that if the whole world likes you and backs you, as Imam Musa bin Ja'far alayhi salatu wassalam is attributed to say to Hisham ibn al-Hakim, if you have a pearl in your hand and the whole world says it's a nut, it's not going to change the value of that pearl. And if you have a nut in your hand and the whole world says it's a pearl, it's not going to raise or elevate the value of that nut. You need to make sure that the message you are bringing is solely for Ali Muhammad.
Inshallah. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us steadfast upon the religion of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, inshallah. May Allah bless you, Shaykhna. I don't want to take up any of your time.
May Allah bless you, and I ask for your forgiveness for being out of contact for quite a while, and in general, I've been too busy to send you those recordings that you asked for.
Yeah.
So inshallah ta'ala, you... What's that, brother?
I know you're busy, Shaykhna, so,
No problem at all.
Inshallah, in time and everything like that, alhamdulillah.
Send my salams to all of the brothers in London.
Inshallah.
And inshallah ta'ala, when you next come to Iraq, or if I'm next in... Wait, did I just... Oh my... Ya Rabbi, that was a very nasty habit. When I'm speaking English, I don't like to say Iraq. When you next come to Iraq, let me know. And because the word in English is Iraq, it's not gonna cough.
Yeah.
Then let me know, and inshallah ta'ala we'll be in contact. Or when I'm next in London, I will let you know, inshallah ta'ala. Please don't forget me in your du'as, and I ask that all the viewers forgive me if I've said anything wrong. If I've said anything correct, then that is due to the blessings and the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal through the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, and anything wrong that I've said is purely through my own shortcomings and my own ignorance. So please forgive me if I said anything in an undiplomatic way, if I said anything that upset anybody. It was not my intention. Please forgive me if I started dismissing the name of your channel too much, but in general, just be careful with the Purified thing. Like when I first saw the advertisement for it, Brother Hassan, I thought, like, has Brother Hassan opened up some filter company? Like, is he filtering water these days? MashaAllah.
Yeah.
So inshallah ta'ala, you take care of yourself and
Inshallah.
send my salams to everyone, and don't forget me in your du'as, inshallah.
Likewise. Ma'as salam, Shaykh.
Ma'as salam.
Ma'as salam.